The hospital was quiet that night, with only the soft hum of the machines and the occasional footsteps of the night staff echoing through the hallways. Outside, the rain tapped lightly against the windows, creating a rhythm that seemed to slow time itself. In one corner of the hospital ward, an elderly veteran lay in a small, dimly lit room. His face was lined with years of life and hardship, and his hands trembled as he tried to hold onto a small, worn photograph. The photograph showed a younger version of him, standing proudly in his military uniform, with a smiling family beside him. The nurse making her rounds noticed him immediately. There was something in his eyes, a mix of fatigue, sorrow, and quiet dignity, that drew her closer. She felt a tug at her heart and paused, watching him for a few moments, unsure of how to approach without disturbing his fragile peace. She walked slowly to his bedside, adjusting the blankets gently and making sure he was comfortable. His breathing was shallow, and the monitor showed his heart rate was irregular. She reached out and softly touched his hand. It was cold, yet there was a surprising strength in his grip when he tried to hold her fingers. The nurse smiled gently and squeezed his hand, hoping to give him a sense of calm and warmth. He looked at her with tired eyes, and she could almost see the memories and experiences of a lifetime reflected there. She didn't speak at first. Words felt unnecessary. The simple act of holding someone's hand, being present in their final hours, seemed more meaningful than anything she could say. The veteran's lips trembled, and he whispered something that the nurse could barely hear. She leaned closer, catching his words, and realized he was trying to say thank you, not for her medical care, not for anything she had done so far, but for being there, for noticing him when so many others had passed by without a second glance. He tried to tell her stories of his past, snippets of battles he had fought, friends he had lost, and places he had seen. His voice was weak, but the nurse listened attentively, nodding and responding with gentle prompts to encourage him to share more. There was a dignity in the way he spoke, a quiet pride that hadn't faded despite the years of hardship and pain. She asked about his family, and his eyes softened as he spoke of his children and grandchildren. He missed them dearly, but circumstances had kept them apart. The nurse could feel the longing and regret in his voice, and she wished she could do more than just hold his hand. She adjusted the pillows behind him, made sure the room was warm enough, and offered a small sip of water. The veteran tried to smile, a faint effort that revealed both his fatigue and his appreciation. The nurse knew that he had lived a full life, but that didn't make the thought of his passing any easier. Time seemed to stretch in that quiet room. The nurse stayed by his side, checking his vitals occasionally, but mostly just being present. She remembered stories she had heard from other veterans, about the sacrifices they had made and the quiet battles they had fought long after the war ended. This man, though quiet and reserved, had his own story, and she felt honored to be a small part of it in his final hours. He looked at her, his eyes moist, and whispered again, words of gratitude she could barely hear. She held his hand tighter, letting him know she was listening, letting him know he was not alone. As the night deepened, the ward grew quieter, and the usual sounds of the hospital seemed to fade into the background. The nurse reflected on her own life, on the people she had cared for, and the moments that had left a lasting impact. There was something about this veteran, about the way he faced the end of his life with quiet courage, that left a mark on her. She thought about the photo he had been holding, imagining the stories behind each face, the laughter, the struggles, and the love that had shaped his life. She wanted him to feel that all of it mattered, that the life he had lived was seen and respected. She spoke softly, telling him stories of her own, little things to fill the quiet room with some warmth. She mentioned the small acts of kindness she had witnessed that day, the smiles of patients, the dedication of her fellow nurses, and the simple beauty of the rain outside. He listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes closing his eyes as if to absorb the comfort. The nurse could see the tension in his body slowly ease, the tight grip on the photograph loosening slightly as he felt the presence of someone who cared. Hours passed in this quiet companionship. The nurse did not leave his side, and he did not ask her to. It was a shared understanding, a silent agreement that they would spend these precious moments together. She adjusted his blankets when he shifted uncomfortably and held his hand whenever he seemed anxious. Occasionally, she spoke his name softly, a grounding presence in the ebb and flow of his fading strength. The room, dimly lit by a single lamp, felt like a cocoon, a safe space where the fears and regrets of life could be held gently until the end. The veteran's breathing grew more labored as dawn approached, but there was a peacefulness in his eyes that had not been there before. He looked at the nurse one last time, a faint smile on his lips, and whispered his thanks. The nurse squeezed his hand one final time, feeling the fragility of life and the strength of human connection in that small gesture. She promised him silently that she would remember him, that she would carry his story with her and honor the life he had lived. As the first light of morning crept through the window, the nurse stepped back slightly, giving him space yet remaining close. She reflected on the night, on the quiet moments that spoke louder than words, and on the simple yet profound act of holding someone's hand. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it held the weight of compassion, respect, and humanity. She knew that she had been part of something meaningful, something that went beyond medicine and into the heart of what it meant to care for another person. The veteran's eyes closed gently, and the nurse remained still, honoring the peace he had found in his final hours. She looked at the photograph again, now placed carefully on the bedside table, a symbol of a life filled with love, sacrifice, and memories. She whispered a quiet goodbye, knowing that though his body was leaving the world, his story would live on in the hearts of those who had witnessed his courage and kindness. She stepped out of the room briefly to gather herself, taking a deep breath, aware that the bond they had shared, fleeting as it was, had left an indelible mark on her own heart. The night had been long, but it was also full of meaning, and the nurse felt a renewed sense of purpose in the quiet strength of human connection she had witnessed in the life and final moments of the veteran. The evening settled in with a soft golden light that barely reached the hospital corridors, giving the ward a calm, almost sacred feeling. The nurse returned to her patient's room after a short break, carrying a cup of warm tea and a gentle hope to bring some comfort. The veteran was still in bed, his body frail and weakened by illness, yet there was a quiet strength in his posture. His eyes, though tired, seemed to hold memories that stretched across decades. He looked at her with a faint smile, acknowledging her presence, and for a moment, they shared silence together, letting the calmness of the room settle over them. She moved slowly to his side, adjusting his blanket and gently placing her hand over his. The touch was light, tender, and meant to convey that he was not alone. He clutched her hand briefly, then released it, a signal that he needed to speak. His voice was soft and raspy, a faint whisper that carried the weight of years. He began to recount fragments of his past, starting with his earliest memories of joining the military, the discipline, the camaraderie, and the moments of fear and bravery that shaped him. The nurse listened intently, her eyes never leaving his, nodding and responding with soft words that encouraged him to continue. He spoke of friends he had lost in battles far from home, comrades whose names still echoed in his mind, and the letters he had written that never reached their intended recipients. He recalled moments of triumph and hardship, moments that had defined his life long before he entered this hospital room. The nurse felt a swell of emotion as she realized the depth of his experiences, the quiet heroism in a life lived with duty and honor. She encouraged him gently, asking about his favorite memories, trying to bring some light into the shadows of the stories he was sharing. As he spoke, the nurse noticed how his body shifted uncomfortably, the illness taking its toll. She carefully adjusted the pillows behind him, ensuring he was as comfortable as possible. She offered him water, which he accepted with trembling hands. Between sips, he continued to share his life, now moving toward his family. He spoke of his children and grandchildren, the pride he felt in their achievements and the regret he carried for moments missed. His words were filled with emotion, and she could see the longing and love in his eyes. The nurse responded softly, letting him know that his love and devotion had always mattered, that it reached beyond the walls of the hospital and into the lives of those he cherished. She realized that these stories were more than memories. They were legacies, pieces of a life that deserved recognition. The veteran paused occasionally, catching his breath, and the nurse gently held his hand during these moments, offering silent support. She reflected on the value of listening, of being present for someone who had given so much, and how small acts of kindness could leave lasting impressions. Each story he told seemed to release some weight from his heart, and the nurse could see his expression soften, the tension in his body easing slightly as he shared more openly. Outside, the rain continued to fall softly, a comforting rhythm that seemed to mirror the slow pace of the evening. The nurse talked to him about the rain, about how it could wash away sadness and bring renewal, not as distraction, but as gentle companionship. He listened, occasionally nodding, sometimes closing his eyes to absorb the comfort of someone caring without judgment. The nurse could sense the deep need for human connection, for understanding and acknowledgement in his every word and gesture. As the night deepened, the veteran grew weaker, but his spirit remained present. He spoke of the values he had lived by: honor, courage, loyalty, and how he hoped those who came after him would carry those lessons forward. The nurse encouraged him, assuring him that his words and actions had meaning, that the life he had lived would not be forgotten. She could feel the weight of his gratitude and the unspoken plea for his story to matter beyond the walls of this hospital room. She took a moment to gently describe her own experiences, the small joys she had witnessed in the ward, the smiles of patients, the dedication of fellow staff, and how even tiny acts of kindness could ripple outward. The veteran listened, occasionally commenting with faint smiles, sometimes with quiet laughter that lit his eyes briefly. The nurse could see the difference it made, the way a gentle presence could ease fear and loneliness, even in the final stages of life. Throughout the night she remained attentive, adjusting blankets, offering sips of water, and holding his hand whenever he seemed anxious. He occasionally whispered words of thanks, words that carried a lifetime of gratitude and recognition for her care. The nurse responded softly, letting him know she understood that his life and stories mattered and that she would carry a piece of them with her. Each gesture, each word became a bridge between their worlds, connecting the past and present, fear and comfort, solitude and companionship. Hours passed, but the nurse never left his side. She watched as he grew visibly weaker, his breath shallower, yet there was a peacefulness in his eyes that was almost serene. She held his hand gently, never wanting him to feel alone, understanding that sometimes presence mattered more than words or medicine. In those quiet moments, she could feel the strength of his character, the resilience of a man who had faced so much and now faced the end with courage and dignity. The rain slowed outside, leaving a gentle patter against the windows, creating a calming backdrop to the quiet room. The nurse continued to speak softly, reminding him of the small beauties of life, the warmth of memories, and the kindness that still existed in the world. The veteran's eyes flickered with emotion, a tear escaping as he felt the comfort and compassion in her presence. She squeezed his hand lightly, letting him know that he was not alone in these final hours. Time seemed to blur as they remained together, a nurse and a veteran, sharing moments that transcended words. He spoke softly of hopes and regrets, of lives touched and memories cherished, while she listened and held him, creating a space of care and respect that was profoundly human. She felt privileged to witness his final reflections, to offer what comfort she could, and to honor a life filled with sacrifice and devotion. As the first hints of morning light began to filter through the blinds, the nurse felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. The veteran's breathing had become lighter, more peaceful, and she knew he was nearing the end. She continued to hold his hand, whispering gentle reassurances, promising that his stories and life would be remembered. In that quiet room filled with the soft light of dawn, the nurse and the veteran shared a bond forged in empathy and compassion, a testament to the profound impact of simple human connection. When the nurse finally stepped back for a moment to collect herself, she felt the weight and the honor of the night. The veteran had shared his life, his memories, and his heart, trusting her presence to witness it all. She looked at the photograph he had held so dearly, now resting on the bedside table, and felt a deep respect for the life it represented. Every story he told, every memory he shared was a thread in the fabric of history, a life of courage, love, and dedication that deserved to be remembered. The nurse left the room briefly, taking a deep breath and preparing herself for whatever the next hours would bring, carrying with her the profound experience of having been present, truly present for someone's final moments. The night had been long and filled with stories, yet it was also filled with meaning, teaching her once again that even the smallest gestures of care and attention could create moments of deep human connection, lasting far beyond the time spent together. The morning after the long night arrived quietly, with soft light spilling through the hospital windows. The nurse walked down the corridor, her mind still with the veteran she had cared for. She had left him only briefly, trusting the other staff to monitor him, but her thoughts kept returning to the fragile life she had been part of preserving the night before. When she reached his room, the stillness was different. The beeping of the monitors was softer, almost like a lull, and the bed was empty of the life she had tended so closely. He had passed away quietly in the early hours, leaving the room filled with a deep, almost tangible sense of presence. Though he was gone. She stepped closer to the bed, taking in the small details of the room. The photograph of his family remained carefully on the bedside table, slightly tilted as if he had reached for it one last time. Nearby, a small envelope rested, sealed and marked with his name. A note from the hospital staff indicated that he had requested it be given to someone who could ensure his final wishes were respected. The nurse picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. It was more than just a letter. It was a piece of the veteran's life, a final message and a request for care beyond the walls of this room. As she held the envelope, she thought about the time spent with him. The hours of listening to his stories, the moments of quiet companionship, the small gestures of care, they all seemed to converge into a profound sense of connection. She realized that even though he was gone, the bond they had formed would remain, a memory of human kindness and understanding that went beyond medical duty. The nurse felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of sadness, gratitude, and awe for the life she had been witness to in its final chapters. The nurse gently placed the envelope in her pocket and took a deep breath. She knew that this was not just about carrying out his last requests, but about honoring the life he had lived and the sacrifices he had made. She reflected on the stories he had shared, the battles, the losses, the love for his family, and understood that the envelope contained more than words. It held a piece of his legacy. She felt a quiet determination to ensure that it would reach the right hands, that his voice would be heard even after he was gone. As she prepared the room for the next patient, her thoughts remained with the veteran. She arranged the blankets, straightened the pillows, and made sure everything was in order. It was a small act of respect, a way of acknowledging the life that had been there. The nurse moved with care, aware that these gestures mattered even if they seemed insignificant. She remembered the stories he had told, the pride in his eyes when speaking of his family, and the quiet courage he had shown in facing the end of his life. Each memory was a thread she would carry forward, a reminder of the human strength that could exist even in moments of vulnerability. Later that morning, the nurse returned to her station, trying to organize her thoughts. She knew that the envelope could contain personal messages, instructions, or even final requests that needed attention. She felt a responsibility to honor the trust he had placed in her, to treat his last words with the care and reverence they deserved. She carefully reviewed her notes from the night before, recalling the stories he had shared, the emotions he had expressed, and the quiet moments that had defined their time together. Every detail mattered, and she wanted to ensure nothing was overlooked. Hours passed, and the nurse continued her rounds, but the veteran remained in her thoughts. She shared moments with other patients, offering comfort and attention, but there was a lingering presence she could not shake. She thought about the importance of connection, of listening, and of being fully present in the lives of those who entrusted their stories to her. The experience with the veteran had reinforced a truth she had always known, that even small gestures of compassion could have profound effects, leaving marks on hearts that would not fade easily. As the day moved forward, a sharply dressed lawyer arrived at the hospital, introducing himself to the nurse. He explained that he had been entrusted with the veteran's final affairs, including any personal messages or legal matters. In his hand was a neatly folded letter, which he explained was the veteran's final communication meant specifically for the nurse. The nurse felt a mixture of anticipation and reverence as she took the letter. It was a tangible link to the life she had been part of caring for, a final connection to someone who had shared so much in their brief time together. The lawyer spoke quietly, explaining that the veteran had wanted someone to witness his life, to ensure that his story and his final wishes were honored. The nurse nodded, understanding the significance of the moment. She carefully opened the letter, revealing words that spoke directly from the heart of the man she had cared for. The letter detailed his gratitude for her presence, the comfort she had provided in his final hours, and the hope that his life and sacrifices would be remembered by someone who could carry them forward. The nurse's eyes filled with tears as she read, feeling the depth of his appreciation and the trust he had placed in her. The letter also included instructions regarding his family and his small pension, ensuring that his last contributions would help those he loved. The nurse read each word slowly, absorbing the meaning. understanding that this was more than a legal document. It was the final expression of a life lived with courage, love, and sacrifice. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that she was now part of his legacy, tasked with honoring his wishes and ensuring his story was remembered. As she folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope, the nurse reflected on the journey of the past day. From the quiet night spent holding his hand to the morning that revealed his passing, she had witnessed the full spectrum of human experience: fear, courage, love, regret, and finally, peace. She understood that her role had been more than medical care. It had been companionship, witnessing and holding space for a life that deserved acknowledgement and respect. The nurse spent a few more moments in the room, touching the photograph of his family gently and whispering a quiet goodbye. She felt a connection that transcended the physical presence, a bond formed through empathy, care, and shared humanity. The room, once filled with the sound of monitors and quiet breathing, now held a stillness that spoke of life fully lived and honored. She left the room with a sense of purpose, determined to ensure that the veteran's story would continue, that his voice would be heard beyond these walls. Throughout the rest of the day, the nurse carried the memory of the veteran with her, sharing his story in small ways with colleagues and finding moments to reflect on the lessons he had imparted. She thought about the importance of listening, of presence, and of simple acts of kindness. Every patient she encountered that day felt the echo of the night spent with him, the reminder that each life held stories worth hearing and honoring. The nurse understood that the veteran's passing was not just an ending, but a reminder of the enduring impact of compassion, and she felt privileged to have been part of it. As the evening approached, the nurse returned to the envelope, reviewing the letter once more. She thought about the trust the veteran had placed in her, and felt a quiet determination to ensure that his wishes would be fulfilled. The lawyer had explained the next steps, and she was ready to assist, knowing that her care extended beyond the walls of the hospital. The letter, a final message of gratitude and guidance, became a symbol of the profound connection formed between two people in moments of vulnerability and care. It reminded her that even in the face of death, the human spirit could reach out, leaving lasting marks on the hearts of those who truly listened. The nurse took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway, feeling the weight and honor of the responsibility she carried. She knew that the veteran's story was now part of her own life, a lesson in courage, kindness, and the power of presence. She walked with purpose, ready to fulfill his wishes, and aware that the simple act of holding his hand the night before had created a ripple effect far beyond what she could have imagined. The day closed with a quiet resolve, a commitment to ensure that the life of a veteran who had given so much would be remembered, honored, and cherished for years to come. The day was bright but calm, with sunlight spilling into the hospital corridors and casting a warm glow over the floors. The nurse carried herself with quiet purpose, the envelope containing the veteran's final letter safely in her bag. She knew that today would be important, that the final wishes of a life lived with honor needed to be fulfilled, and that the story entrusted to her had to be shared with the respect it deserved. The lawyer who had arrived earlier was waiting in a quiet room, prepared to guide her through the next steps. When she entered, he greeted her with a nod, acknowledging the solemnity of the moment. He handed the nurse the neatly folded letter, explaining that it had been the veteran's final message, written with care and intention. The nurse took a deep breath and opened it slowly, feeling the weight of the words before even reading them. The letter was filled with gratitude, reflection, and instructions, a testament to a man who had lived a life of service and who now wanted his life's final chapter to matter. As she began to read, tears formed in her eyes, for the words were raw and heartfelt, a bridge between the living and those who had passed. The veteran spoke of the moments of joy, the friends he had lost, the family he cherished, and the hope that his life would leave some small mark on the world. The lawyer watched quietly as she read, understanding that this was more than a simple communication. It was a final connection, a deeply human moment that transcended paperwork and legalities. The nurse's hands trembled slightly as she held the paper, her mind picturing the life behind the words. She imagined the young man who had joined the military, the long years of service, the sacrifices, and the quiet courage he had carried throughout his life. Every sentence felt like a window into his heart, revealing the depth of his gratitude and the care he had taken to ensure that those he loved would be looked after. The letter also contained instructions for his family, including details about his small pension and how he hoped it could be used to support them in the coming months. There were messages to be delivered, reminders of love and pride, and assurances that he had lived a life with purpose. The nurse felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that she was the person chosen to receive this message, to act as a witness to his life and legacy. She carefully read each word, absorbing the meaning and feeling the weight of the trust he had placed in her. As she continued reading, she felt a profound connection to the veteran, a bond that had been formed in the quiet moments of the night before, when she had held his hand and listened to his stories. The letter reinforced the importance of those small acts of compassion, showing that her presence had mattered more than she could have imagined. The nurse felt both humbled and honored, understanding that her care had reached far beyond the physical, touching the heart of a man who had lived a remarkable life. The lawyer then explained the next steps, outlining how the veteran's instructions would be carried out. The nurse listened carefully, feeling the gravity of the responsibility but also a sense of purpose and clarity. She knew that this was not just about fulfilling legal obligations. It was about honoring a life, ensuring that his stories and wishes were remembered and that the love he had for his family continued to be expressed even after he was gone. Every detail mattered, and she committed herself to ensuring that nothing would be overlooked. She took a moment to reflect on the experiences of the past days, the quiet nights spent with the veteran, the stories he had shared, the small gestures of care that had formed a bond between them. The letter was a continuation of that connection, a tangible representation of his gratitude and trust. She realized that these moments, though brief, had created a lasting impact, a ripple effect that would extend into the lives of those who would receive his messages and be touched by his story. The nurse felt the presence of the veteran as she continued reading, imagining his voice, the strength in his eyes, and the quiet courage that had defined his life. She thought about the stories he had told her, the battles, the sacrifices, the friendships, and the family he held dear. The letter allowed her to carry those stories forward, to become a vessel for his words and a witness to the life he had led. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that her role extended beyond the walls of the hospital, reaching into the lives of those who mattered most to him. As the lawyer reviewed the instructions in the letter, the nurse carefully documented the steps she would take, ensuring that each request would be honored with care and respect. She felt a mixture of sadness and pride, knowing that she was part of a process that would help preserve the legacy of a man who had given so much. She thought about the impact that one life could have, the stories that could inspire, and the lessons that could be learned from someone who had faced the world with courage and compassion. Throughout the day, the nurse reflected on the importance of empathy, presence, and small acts of kindness. She realized that holding the veteran's hand, listening to his stories, and offering comfort in his final hours had created a bond that went beyond words. The letter was a continuation of that bond, a final expression of gratitude and trust that reinforced the significance of her actions. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her care had mattered, that she had made a difference in the life of someone who had dedicated his own to serving others. The lawyer prepared to leave, acknowledging the nurse's role in this deeply human process. He reassured her that she would be supported in fulfilling the veteran's wishes and that the family would be contacted according to his instructions. The nurse thanked him quietly, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the honor of being entrusted with such an important task. She carefully placed the letter back in the envelope, treating it with reverence and understanding its significance in preserving the veteran's legacy. As she returned to the veteran's room one last time, the nurse took a quiet moment to honor his memory. She touched the photograph of his family, gently straightened the blankets, and whispered a soft goodbye. She felt a connection that transcended the physical presence, a bond formed through empathy, care, and shared humanity. The room, now empty, still held a sense of peace and reverence, a testament to a life lived with courage and dignity. The nurse walked through the hospital corridors with a sense of calm and purpose. She knew that her actions would ensure that the veteran's wishes were honored and that his story would be remembered. She reflected on the profound impact that small gestures of compassion could have, the importance of being present, and the lasting influence of empathy and care. Every patient she encountered that day carried a small echo of the lessons she had learned, a reminder that human connection could create ripples far beyond the immediate moment. As the evening approached, the nurse reviewed the letter and instructions one more time, making sure that every detail would be followed. She felt a quiet determination to ensure that the veteran's legacy would be honored, and that his family would receive the love and support he had intended. The letter, a final testament to a life of service and devotion, became a symbol of the profound connection formed between two people in moments of vulnerability and care. It reminded her that even in the face of death, the human spirit could leave lasting marks on the hearts of those who truly listened. The nurse took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway. Carrying with her the weight and honor of the responsibility entrusted to her, she knew that the veteran's story was now part of her own life, a lesson in courage, kindness, and the power of presence. She walked with purpose, ready to fulfill his wishes and aware that the simple act of holding his hand the night before had created a ripple effect far beyond what she could have imagined. The day closed with a quiet resolve, a commitment to ensure that the life of a veteran who had given so much would be remembered, honored, and cherished for years to come. The nurse felt the profound meaning of compassion and human connection, knowing that her care had truly made a difference in the life of a man whose story would continue to inspire and touch others long after he was gone.